Before that, we got the third round rules coming up. Again, everything gets doubled from the second round. A great take gives you 800 points. A good take gives you 400. An okay take gives you 200. And a bad take, again, 0 points right there. So again, there's a lot of storylines regarding the Chiefs dynasty and some arguments about, are they a dynasty yet? They only have 2 rings. A third title would unquestionably put them as the NFL's dynasty, really, I guess you could say, of the 2020s to sort of succeed the Patriots' 20-year run. But a big story with Kansas City's dynasty and Mahomes' greatness, Kelsey's greatness, Andy Reid as well. And then you got San Francisco, who, as great as they are, as loaded as they are, as much of success as they've had in the last 25 years or so, they've gotten to a couple Super Bowls. They got to a Super Bowl just 4 years ago with this very squad. They have not won a title. This is hard to believe for some people. The Dallas Cowboys have won a Super Bowl more recently than the 49ers, if you can believe that. They have not won since 1994. So I will start with you, my friend Alfred Parsar Jr. What do you think the bigger storyline is, or maybe the more important storyline? Is it Kansas City's potential dynasty if they haven't reached that yet, or is it San Francisco breaking a long championship drought?
I think it's San Francisco breaking the drought, and I'll tell you why. Amongst sports, you get very passionate fan bases, and fan bases, as we've seen, and not just football, but every sport, basketball, baseball, when there's a team that breaks a drought, especially when the fans have been suffering for a very long time, it always makes for that feel-good story. It's always major news because, and I'll give some examples. When the Cleveland Cavaliers beat the Golden State Warriors, sorry, my friend, yeah. And they won their first NBA title in God knows how long. The story was the headline story was not only about LeBron, but they put the drought right next to it. Same thing when the Chicago Cubs won the 2016 World Series. Yes, they talked about Javi Baez and Anthony Rizzo and all these guys, but they also put an emphasis on the 100-plus year drought of them winning the World Series. Everybody knows that the Chiefs are a dynasty. While they only have 2 Super Bowl rings, everybody, I would assume, would wake up in the start of training camp and expect the Chiefs to always have a deep playoff run the last couple of years. They've won 2, they've lost 1. They're always in the mix. When he did lose to Burrow, it was the AFC Championship game. So, I mean, the success is already expected of them. Their fan base is not starved for success or championships in that matter. To not have a Super Bowl win since 1994, that's kind of steep, especially when you not only take into account 10 years ago, actually, when they lost to the Ravens in a game that they led. I'm pretty sure the 49er fans out there haven't forgotten about that. And then prior to that, they were bad for a very long time in the after the Jeff Garcia, Terrell Owens days. So I think the bigger story would be them breaking the drought than the Chiefs winning another one. Just because the fans will have something to rejoice about finally. After coming so close a decade ago and to now slay the Houdini of postseason football in Mahomes and company. And they'll get Taylor Swift to not be on the cover of Madden next year.
So we have already confirmed anti-Swifter. I hear the 8 o'clock spot. It's rough. It's rough out there. But listen, I think like there's people do forget. Listen, like San Francisco after that Steve Young run there that they had in the 90s, where, by the way, one of the more underrated quarterbacks in NFL history, Steve Young, they had a stretch, like you said, of some bad football. It wasn't really until Jim Harbaugh came in, just kind of stabilized the organization. Then they fired him, ran through some coaches, came across Kyle Shanahan. And by the way, real quick, I don't usually go to the comments mid-segment, but it is noteworthy. Our guy Tim Barnard, who has been on the 8 o'clock spot multiple times, he says if the Niners win, I don't think it's about the Niners' 30-year drought, but more about Kyle Shanahan finally overcoming his blunders to win. Like that's kind of the knock on Shanahan is like brilliant offensive coach, great, schemer, run designer, all that West Coast offense, but the blown fourth quarter leads to Atlanta, to when he was the OC for the Falcons. Blown fourth quarter lead to the Patriots when he was the OC of the Falcons. Blown fourth quarter lead to Kansas City. Blown fourth quarter lead to the Rams in the NFC title game a couple years back. That would go a long way for Kyle Shanahan. There's no question about that. Alfred, I give you a good take. I would have given you a great one. The only reason I didn't give you a great one is because, A, you took a shot at my Warriors. I'm just kidding. That's not why I gave you a good take. It has nothing to do with it. It has more to do with the fact the Niners' 30-year drought would be more applicable to, like you mentioned, the Cubs, to the city of Cleveland, those cities, those franchises. if it were like a Detroit, right? Like if this were Detroit, it'd be like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. They finally broke the curse of Bobby Lane from the 50s. San Francisco has at least one within the modern contract of the Super Bowl era. But nonetheless, still a good take by Alfred Parso Jr. To AJ, what's the bigger storyline in your mind, AJ? Is it the Kansas City Chiefs pending dynasty, if it's not already become official yet, or is the Niners trying to break a 30-year title drought?
Yeah, maybe I am old school. I'm coming around to this, but a dynasty to me is 3 championships in a row or 3 in 4 years. But look, I know a lot of the leagues had less teams in it back then when that was a little bit more achievable. So I'm coming around to being all right with calling the Chiefs a dynasty. But to answer your question, I look at, like, back-to-back's impressive, absolutely, definitely. But of course, I certainly don't want Taylor Swift touching that Lombardi either. But
she's not a player, bro.
Yeah, but it's going to happen, man. It's going to happen if the Chiefs win. But look, 49ers, that Super Bowl win would put them tied for first with 7 Super Bowls on the team with your Steelers, Bryson, and the Pats, and puts them one behind Tom Brady, too, by the way, and also ahead of the Cowboys. Okay, it leaps them above the Cowboys, and they'll have 6 Super Bowls there. But what I like better about San Francisco winning is it sets up a nice trilogy, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 2 years we see this run back again with Chiefs and 49ers. I'm not hoping for it, but I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. And so in that event, and building up this storyline over, say, starting this year and the next 3 years, that's what I would like to see is 49ers win, and then if it's inevitable that they're going to play again, at least it's going to be a winner takes all kind of game in number 3. So, that storyline is more exciting to me.
Yeah, like listen, that's all the more reason for me to root for the Chiefs, is because they could tie Pittsburgh and New England with the 6 championships. It definitely want to at least maintain that lead with the Patriots. And who knows, maybe in the next decade, if we can finally get a quarterback, actually at least attempt to get to 7. But listen, like you said, with San Francisco, the history with the 80s run, the 80s dynasty, being able to win in the 90s and be able to come back 30 years later, even with all the tumultuous things going on in the NFL, with the Patriots running the show for 2 decades prior to 2020 or 2019, really, that San Francisco tying up would go a very long way. So solid points, AJ. I'll give you an okay take to get you to 500 points here. I think overall the sort of narrative surrounding San Francisco and be able to break this drought are one that I don't think has been as big of a story. It's partly why I included it in the segment. Dylan, your take. Would a Chiefs dynasty, which with the title, which they would undoubtedly cement themselves as, or a San Francisco 49ers breaking their championship drought, which would be a bigger story in your mind?
I think I have to go with the Chiefs, quite honestly. I mean, as much as breaking a drought's always nice, the Niners have had long sustained success, even with their Super Bowl losses. I mean, they're always a team that, has been in it, done well. And even with established championships going, back, a couple of decades ago, it does kind of give me a little bit of a Cowboys-ish kind of feel where, they had their dynasty in the past. They had a lot of success. And I don't think anyone's going to really, even if the Niners get their 6th championship, I don't think they're going to look at that much differently than if we did have a Lions or if we did have a team that didn't have as much success breaking their drought. But with the Chiefs, on the other hand, winning back-to-back championships is not easy. The last time we saw this was the early 2000s with the Patriots. Dating back, I mean, like the 2010s is the only decade in NFL history, the full decade, I should say, that we didn't have a back-to-back championship winning team. And I think that's huge. Because, I mean, especially pre-salary cap, we always had these teams that just heavily dominated. And I feel like we also had, like, especially since the previous 20 years, with Tom Brady, I think we kind of got exhausted and kind of just used to having a team just being so dominant. And now with Mahomes and the Chiefs now starting their possible dynasty with this championship, I think we're kind of just used to it. But I think the historic implications of them winning back-to-back with the Chiefs is just so big. And especially considering how early Mahomes is in his career, if he can still sustain the success and win the back-to-back and, continues this trajectory, then, Mahomes could set some insane records that could be possibly unbreakable. And considering the amount of great teams that have been around, especially in those 2010s, for not a single back-to-back championship, I think it would definitely be very big for not only Mahomes' case, but just the Chiefs in general, for them to get that dynasty this year.
That's a fascinating stat. I never thought about that. I mean, I knew it had been essentially 2 decades since we had a back-to-back championship champion with the Patriots in 03 and 04, but I did not even think about the 2010s. Obviously, kind of was this, obviously the Patriots got, I think, at 1.3 titles in 5 years in 14, 16, and 18, but listen, you had teams like Seattle who almost, at least looks like they were going to potentially be the next dynasty, and the Patriots kind of stole that from them in Super Bowl 49. You had Denver winning, you had the Rams, the early 2020s, and then teams that decade, that's kind of when Kansas City's dynasty started. That's a fascinating stat. So Dylan Lima, we haven't had a great take since the first round. My friend, you got it up to 950 points. Dylan is in the lead for the moment. We'll see what Dalton has to say, but great take. I think the historical ramifications of a Kansas City dynasty is highly significant. So great take there by Dylan. Finally with you, Dalton, what would a Kansas City Chiefs, let me rephrase that. What would be more impactful? A Kansas City Chiefs win to cement this dynasty, or a 49ers win to break a 30-year, I wouldn't say curse, but a drought?
Yeah, and so I think the original question was, what would be a bigger story, right? The bigger story would be Kansas City winning, undoubtedly, and kudos to Dylan, because that was the first legitimate take of the three to me, and not just because of the side he was on. This idea that we're comparing San Francisco to tortured franchises like the Cleveland Cavaliers and Chicago Cubs is absurd. It's one of the most successful franchises in NFL history. And by the way, there are 32 teams in the NFL. If every team was equally tortured or had equal likelihood each year of winning it, you expect to win about one every 32 years. This isn't a drought. Like, winning one in every 30 years is not a drought. It's about what you expect for any given NFL franchise. So I want to start there. Secondly, if we're talking about what's a bigger story, there's nothing that the media likes more as far as a larger story to talk about than the impending building of a dynasty, the existence of a dynasty and the building of a dynasty. That's as big as a story gets. You don't think newspapers and pundits nationally loved the fact that the Patriots were so good for so long? That type of building success gives you a deeper and more intense story to talk about, right? You're telling a longer story. You're talking about legacies as opposed to just, well, the story of this season. In terms of like how exciting the story would be, it's not even close. It's the Chiefs. The places you can take where Mahomes might go from this title, Dylan hit on it. That's the bigger story by far. Now, I mean, San Francisco, would create stories of its own, but not nearly on the scale that Kansas City is, right? I mean, this is the type where it's like, okay, now he's got three. So for me, it's not even close. I mean, San Francisco, good for them. I guess they're overcoming a couple years of almost getting it, sort of. But I mean, what are they overcoming that the Bills wouldn't have been overcoming this year, or that, several other teams wouldn't have been overcoming this year? I mean, the better story than the Niners was the team they beat last round, not the
10
Niners.
seconds, Dalton.
So, not even close. Yeah, Chiefs.
Yeah, and that's, you sort of hit on a point that I've said for years. Like, the NFL is really the only sport that can kind of get away with it because of their overall popularity on television. Is parity really isn't that good for professional sports historically. I mean, listen, the Bulls in the 90s, highest rated decade probably, I think, in NBA history, if I'm not mistaken. Bird and Magic saved the NBA in the 80s. And Golden State, everybody hated Golden State. And listen, maybe I sound biased as a Warriors fan, but let's be honest, the NBA was a lot more intriguing. There was a lot more storylines when Golden State was, what's that?
Yeah, and Bryson, even in baseball, right? The 90s were a bit of a golden age for baseball while the Yankees were winning over and over and over. It sells.
It does. And that's I'm sort of half saying this, but listen, the Dodgers are certainly not a dynasty, but I would, if your Dodgers were to go on a little bit of a run, I think baseball desperately needs a villain. Haven't had one since the Yankees, as you mentioned. Like, those tend to be good for sports historically. So great take there, Dalton. That puts you in the lead with 1,200 points going the final round. Now, normally that would mean our point totals, if you look at them right now, Dalton and Dylan at first and second, that would mean Dalton and Dylan move to the final round, but it is a special Super Bowl episode. So everybody moves on to round 4 because I want to hear everybody's Super Bowl predictions.